When I walked into my apartment after a long, exhausting work trip, all I wanted was a hot shower, a quiet night, and the comfort of my own bed. What I got instead was my entitled sister Melanie sprawled across my couch, sipping my wine and flipping through channels like she owned the place. The coffee table was covered in takeout containers I definitely didn't buy. My favorite blanket was draped over her like a personal throne, and the scent of my expensive lavender candles, the ones I only used on special occasions, filled the air. It was like I had stepped into some bizarre alternate reality where my apartment had transformed into her personal kingdom. I dropped my suitcase with a thud, the sound cutting through the mindless chatter of the TV. Melanie barely even flinched. She slowly turned her head, took another long, obnoxious sip from my wine glass, and raised an eyebrow like I was the intruder here. "You're back early," she said, like this was her place and I was just a guest overstaying my welcome. I stared at her, trying to piece together the situation, trying to understand how exactly my younger sister, who I hadn't seen in months, who had never paid rent a day in her life, who had a bad habit of weaseling her way into situations she had no business being in, had somehow ended up living in my apartment. "Melanie," I said, voice tight, "what the hell are you doing here?" She let out a sigh, as if my frustration was some great inconvenience to her. Then she stretched, taking her sweet time, setting the wine glass down before finally sitting up, brushing my blanket off like it was suddenly beneath her. "Well," she said, completely unfazed, "I needed a place to stay, and your place was empty, so I figured, why not?" I blinked, my brain short-circuiting at the sheer audacity. She figured, why not? Like my apartment was some abandoned hotel she could check into whenever she pleased. "You needed a place to stay," I repeated, my voice eerily calm, "so you just moved into mine?" She rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. "God, relax. It's not like you were using it. Besides, I cleaned up a little." She gestured vaguely to the absolute disaster zone that was my living room, and I restocked the fridge. I glanced toward the kitchen, and sure enough, the fridge was full. But instead of my usual groceries, it was packed with her favorites: energy drinks, overpriced oat milk, those ridiculous organic fruit packs she always insisted on eating, but never actually finished. Not a single thing in there belonged to me. "You don't live here," I said, my patience unraveling fast. "You can't just take over my apartment like you own it." Melanie scoffed, actually scoffed, like I was the one being dramatic. "Oh, come on. Don't be so uptight. It's just a temporary situation. I'm between places right now, and I needed somewhere comfortable to stay." And this, she spread her arms, as if she had designed the place herself, "is much nicer than the alternatives." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to take a deep breath, because if I didn't, I was going to say something that would end with me being arrested. "Get out," I said, barely keeping my voice level. Melanie smirked, like she had expected me to react like this. Then, as if this were some kind of power move, she leaned back against the couch, grabbed the remote, and turned up the volume. "Geez, you're so touchy," she muttered, crossing her legs as if she was settling in for the night.
Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
"Fine, if you're going to be like that, you can crash on the couch if you behave." I froze. She actually had the nerve to tell me to crash on my own damn couch. Something inside me snapped into place, a clarity so sharp it almost made me smile. Because this wasn't just entitlement. This wasn't just Melanie being selfish. This was a challenge. And if she thought I was about to let her win, she had another thing coming. I didn't say another word. I didn't argue. I didn't waste my breath trying to reason with someone who had never faced a consequence in her life. Instead, I turned on my heel, pulled out my phone, and made a single call. Melanie didn't even look up, too busy flipping through my streaming subscriptions, too confident that I would just roll over like I always had. But when she woke up the next morning to the sound of my building security team pounding on the door, she realized, too late, that she had severely underestimated me. Her scream echoed through the hallway, sharp and furious, filled with absolute panic. And I just smiled. Game on. Melanie's scream started the moment she realized the door wouldn't open, the sound of her frantic pounding echoing down the hallway like some kind of deranged alarm clock. I took my time getting out of bed, stretching slowly, letting her stew in her panic for a little while. She deserved to feel trapped, just like I had felt the night before when I had walked into my own home and been treated like some unwanted guest in my own space. "Sarah," she shrieked, her fists slamming against the door, her voice raw with frustration. "What the hell did you do?" I smirked as I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, scrolling through my messages until I found the one I had sent the night before, the one to my building's management, informing them that an unauthorized squatter had broken into my apartment. The response had been swift, professional, and brutally efficient. "Good morning, Melanie," I said sweetly as I unlocked the door, swinging it open just enough to see her standing there in my hallway, wearing my robe, looking like she had just crawled out of a dumpster fire. "Sleep well?" She shoved past me, storming inside, her eyes wild, her hair a tangled mess. "Why won't my key work?" she snapped, holding up my spare apartment key, the one she had clearly taken without permission. I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms over my chest, letting her question hang in the air. "Because it's not your key," I said simply, watching as realization sank in. She blinked, like the concept was foreign to her. You changed the locks?" I smiled. "Sure did." Melanie let out a laugh, sharp, disbelieving, completely detached from reality. "You're joking. You seriously think you can lock me out of here like some stranger?" I tilted my head. "Well, Melanie, let's break this down, shall we? You don't live here. You moved in without asking. You made it very clear that you weren't planning on leaving. And when I told you to get out, you told me I could crash on the couch if I behaved. So, yeah, I locked you out. And I gotta say, it feels fantastic." Her mouth opened, then closed, her face twitching through at least 5 different emotions, none of them pleasant. "You're being insane," she finally said, shaking her head. "You can't just throw me out like some random squatter." I let out a laugh, unable to help myself. "Melanie, you're a random squatter. You don't live here. You don't pay rent. You don't own a single thing in this apartment. You moved in like you had a right to it, but here's the thing, you don't." Her hands balled into fists, her face twisting into that familiar expression of entitled fury that I had seen 1,000 times before, back when we were kids and she would steal my things, fully expecting to get away with it. "You're my sister," she spat, as if that alone justified everything. "Family is supposed to help each other, not screw each other over." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean like how you helped me last night by kicking me out of my own bed? Or how you restocked the fridge with only your favorite food and threw out all of mine? Or maybe you mean how you stole my spare key and decided you were entitled to my home without ever asking?" Melanie's face turned red, but she didn't back down. She never did. Instead, she switched tactics, her voice softening, her shoulders drooping, her eyes going glassy like she was just some poor victim in all of this. "I had nowhere else to go," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "I was in a bad situation, Sarah. I just needed a place to stay. And I thought you'd understand." I didn't blink. "And yet, when I asked you to leave, you laughed in my face and told me to sleep on the couch." For the first time, she faltered. I didn't let the silence drag. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up the official eviction notice from my building's management, and held it out to her. "Since you refused to leave on your own, management had to get involved," I said, watching as she reluctantly took the paper from my hands. "You're officially banned from this apartment. You're not a tenant. You're not a guest. And if you try to pull this stunt again, security will have you removed." Melanie's hands trembled as she read the document, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts, her mind finally catching up to the reality of the situation. You actually did this?" she whispered, almost in disbelief. I shrugged. "Well, you said I could stay here if I behaved. So I behaved. And now? Now, you can go figure out where you're staying next. Because it won't be here." The look on her face was delicious. But I knew my sister. This wasn't over. She wasn't just going to walk away. She had lost the battle, but in her mind, the war had just begun. So when she turned on her heel, storming toward the door, muttering under her breath about how she'd fix this, I knew exactly what she was going to do next. She was going to call our mother. And that was exactly what I wanted. I barely had time to enjoy the peace and quiet before my phone started ringing, the screen lighting up with one name I had been expecting all morning, Mom. I let it ring a few times, taking my time, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee, inhaling the rich scent before finally answering. Morning, Mom, I said casually, taking a slow sip. Sarah, she snapped, her voice already sharp with accusation. What on earth is wrong with you? I let out a soft sigh, leaning against the counter, staring out the window at the city skyline. Oh, I don't know, Mom. Maybe it's the fact that I came home from a long work trip only to find that my dear sister had moved into my apartment without permission, kicked me out of my own bedroom, and acted like she owned the place. Or maybe it's the fact that she told me I could crash on my own couch if I behaved. You tell me, what exactly do you think is wrong with me? Mom let out a frustrated huff, as if I was being difficult on purpose. Melanie told me everything, she said, her voice thick with forced disappointment. She said she had nowhere else to go, and instead of being a good sister and letting her stay, you had her thrown out onto the street. How could you do that to her? I closed my eyes, counted to 5, and reminded myself that I had seen this coming. I knew Melanie would spin the story to make herself the victim, and I knew my mother, her biggest enabler, would lap it up without question. First of all, Mom, I said, my voice calm but firm. She didn't have nowhere else to go. She had options. She just didn't want them because they weren't as nice as my apartment. Second, I didn't throw her out onto the street. She was illegally squatting in my home. She's lucky I didn't call the police. Mom gasped like I had just suggested setting Melanie on fire. Sarah, how could you say something so heartless? She's your sister. I let out a bitter chuckle, shaking my head. Yeah? And what does that mean exactly, Mom? That she gets to do whatever she wants? That I'm supposed to let her walk all over me because we happen to share some DNA? She's family, Mom insisted, her tone growing colder, sharper. And family takes care of each other. I gritted my teeth. Funny, I said, my patience wearing dangerously thin, because I don't recall Melanie ever taking care of me when I needed help. In fact, I distinctly remember her stealing my rent money in college and leaving me to scramble so I wouldn't get evicted. I also remember her borrowing my car and crashing it without paying for a single repair. And let's not forget the time she maxed out my credit card and told me to relax because the bank would handle it. Silence. I knew Mom remembered all of it, but that didn't mean she would acknowledge it. She never did. That was years ago, she finally muttered. She's changed. I let out a sharp laugh. Oh, yeah? Then why did she try to move into my home behind my back like it was hers to take? Why did she have the nerve to act like I was the guest here? And why, Mom? Why? My voice dropped lower. The final blow lined up perfectly. Did she call you instead of finding a real solution to her problems? Mom had no answer. Because we both knew the truth. Melanie didn't call our mother because she needed help. She called her because she knew Mom would come running, twisting the situation until somehow I was the villain and she was the poor, helpless victim who had been treated unfairly. And Mom, as always, had fallen for it. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. If you care so much, I said, my voice smooth and cutting, why don't you take her in? You have plenty of space, don't you? Mom hesitated. I could hear the discomfort in her silence. Well, you know, she started, her tone suddenly much less aggressive. It's not that simple. She and I have different ways of living. And she's not exactly easy to have around. You know how she is. I smiled. Gotcha. Yeah, Mom, I said, letting my voice drip with amusement. I do know how she is. And that's exactly why she's not my problem anymore. Mom sputtered, trying to recover, trying to backtrack, but I had already made my point. Melanie wasn't my responsibility. She never had been. And I wasn't going to sacrifice my peace of mind for someone who had never once cared about mine. Look, I said finally, cutting off whatever excuse Mom was about to throw at me. You can keep defending her all you want, but I'm done. If you want to help her, go ahead. Let her crash at your place, pay her rent, do whatever you want. But she is not coming back here. Mom huffed, clearly frustrated that I wasn't rolling over like I used to. Fine, she snapped. But don't come crying to me when you need something and find yourself alone. I let out another laugh, this one softer. I'd rather be alone than be surrounded by people who only show up when they want something. And with that, I ended the call. For the first time in a very long time, I felt a strange sense of freedom. But I also knew one thing for certain. Melanie wasn't done yet. She had lost the apartment. She had lost Mom's easy solution, but she hadn't lost the war. And Melanie? She never lost without a fight. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go. Yet. I didn't hear from Melanie for a few days, which would have been a blessing if I didn't know her better. She was too quiet, too still, too absent, which meant only one thing: she was planning something. Melanie never let a loss sit for long. She always came back swinging, and she always played dirty. So when I got an unexpected call from my landlord 3 days later, I wasn't surprised. "Hey, Sarah," he greeted, his voice slightly hesitant. "Listen, I just wanted to follow up with you about that situation at your apartment. Your, sister called earlier." I exhaled slowly, gripping my coffee mug a little tighter. Of course she did. What did she say? "Well," he said, drawing out the word, "she told us that you're planning on moving out and that she's going to be taking over the lease." I nearly dropped my mug. "She what?" I said, barely keeping my voice level. "Yeah," he continued, clearing his throat. "She said she already spoke to you about it, that you agreed to transfer the lease to her, and she wanted to start the paperwork as soon as possible." I let out a sharp laugh, shaking my head. Of course she did. This wasn't just a last-ditch effort. This was a calculated move, a con, a straight-up attempted theft. She was trying to steal my apartment from under me, probably hoping I wouldn't figure it out until it was too late. "Let me guess," I said, already knowing the answer. "She told you I was going to move in with a boyfriend or relocate for work, right?" There was a pause before my landlord sighed. "Yeah, that was pretty much the story." I almost wanted to be impressed. It was classic Melanie, making bold moves, lying without a hint of shame, assuming she could force reality to bend to her will if she just said things with enough confidence. "Well," I said, straightening up, "she's lying. I am not moving out. I am not transferring the lease, and if she tries anything else, I will press charges for fraud." "Got it," my landlord said, clearly relieved. I figured something was off, but I wanted to check with you directly before I shut it down. I'll make sure she's permanently flagged in the system, so even if she tries to call back, it won't matter. I smiled. Perfect. That should have been the end of it. But Melanie wasn't going to let go that easily. So I decided that if she wanted to play dirty, I would play smarter. I made a different phone call that afternoon, one that Melanie would never see coming. The next day, Melanie texted me like nothing had happened. "Melanie, hey, so I've been thinking. Maybe we should talk." I stared at my screen, already knowing where this was going. "Melanie, maybe we can figure out a solution. Like a compromise." I think we both overreacted. I smirked, because I could see the setup from a mile away. This wasn't about making peace. This was about baiting me into a deal that benefited her. So I played along. "Sure, let's talk. Come over later." She showed up within the hour, looking eerily confident, like she thought she was about to convince me to hand over my own home. She sauntered inside, plopped onto the couch like she still belonged here, and gave me her best attempt at a sympathetic smile. "You know, Sarah," she said, her voice soft, "I really didn't mean for things to get so tense between us. I just needed a place to stay for a little while, and I thought you'd understand. I mean, we're sisters. We should be helping each other." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean like how you helped me by trying to steal my apartment lease behind my back?" Her expression barely flickered. "That was just a misunderstanding." I laughed out loud. "A misunderstanding? Melanie, you literally called my landlord and told him I was moving out." What exactly was I misunderstanding? She waved her hand, completely unbothered by being caught. Okay, fine. Maybe I got a little ahead of myself. But that's exactly why I came here today, to work things out. We don't have to keep fighting over this. I have a proposal. I leaned back, crossing my arms. I'm listening. She smiled, like she thought she was about to seal the deal. I'll move back in, she said smoothly, but I'll pay part of the rent this time. I mean, it's a win-win, right? You get help with expenses, and I get a place to stay. I kept my face perfectly neutral, but inside, I was laughing. She thought she was playing me. But she had already walked into my trap. You know what? I said, feigning hesitation. That actually doesn't sound like a terrible idea. Her eyes lit up. She thought she had one. So I continued, keeping my tone casual. Just to make things official, I'll have a written agreement drafted. Nothing too serious, just something simple to lay out the terms. She shrugged. Sure, whatever. As long as it gets me back in. I pulled out a folder from the counter, already prepared. Great. I actually had something drafted up just in case. Melanie, being Melanie, didn't even bother to read it. She just grabbed the pen, signed at the bottom, and smiled like she had just pulled off the perfect scam. But what she didn't know was that the document she had just signed wasn't a rental agreement. It was a legally binding eviction waiver. By signing it, she had just given up any and all rights to ever claim tenancy in my apartment again. Permanently. She looked up at me, smug, unaware of what she had just done. So, she said, stretching, when can I move back in? I smiled, folding the document neatly. Oh, you're not moving back in, Melanie. You're never stepping foot in here again. Her smile faltered. What? You just signed a document stating that you acknowledge you have no legal claim to this apartment. Now or ever, I said, my voice sickeningly sweet. And if you try anything again, I'll take this straight to the police. Melanie went pale. She snatched the paper, her hands shaking as she scanned the words, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts as she realized she had just played herself. You tricked me. She gasped. I smirked, enjoying every second of her unraveling. You really should start reading things before you sign them. She shot up, her chair screeching against the floor. You think you can just cut me out like this? She hissed. You think I'm just going to let this go? I tilted my head, letting the silence stretch. Try me, I said softly, because this wasn't over yet. I could see it in her eyes. She still had one last move left. I just didn't know what it was. Yet. Melanie didn't storm out right away. She just stood there, gripping the document with white-knuckled fingers, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to find the right words. She had always been quick on her feet, always able to lie her way out of trouble, but this time, she had signed her own downfall, and she knew it. But I also knew my sister never admitted defeat that easily. Sarah, she said, her voice eerily calm, her expression shifting into something almost pitiful. You didn't have to do this. I wasn't trying to hurt you. She swallowed, shaking her head. I just needed some stability. You don't know what it's been like for me these past few months. I crossed my arms, unimpressed. You mean when you were bouncing from one friend's couch to another because you burned every bridge you had? Or when you tried to steal my apartment out from under me? Or when you lied to Mom so she'd turn on me? You're right, Melanie, I have no idea what that's like. Her face twisted in frustration before she caught herself, forcing a deep breath, switching tactics again. I made a mistake, she admitted, her voice soft, her eyes glassy. But I'm still your sister. And I don't want things to be like this between us. There it was. The final act. Tug at the heartstrings, play the wounded victim, make me second-guess myself. It had worked before. It had worked on our mother. It had worked on countless friends and ex-boyfriends who had once believed her sob stories. But I wasn't them. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice steady. You're my sister. But that doesn't mean I owe you a damn thing. She blinked, startled by the coldness in my tone. I didn't give her time to recover. You moved into my apartment behind my back, Acted like you were doing me a favor by letting me sleep on my own couch, and then, when I kicked you out, you tried to steal my lease. And when that didn't work, you ran to Mom and told her a sob story so she'd come after me instead. Now you're standing here, acting like all of that was just a misunderstanding? I took a step closer, lowering my voice. No, Melanie. That was a choice. And now you're just pissed because you finally ran out of people to manipulate. Her entire face hardened. The fake sorrow, the pitiful expression, gone. Just like that, the real Melanie surfaced, the one who only cared about herself, the one who had been playing this game for years. You think you're so much better than me, she spat, her voice sharp with resentment. You've always acted like you were the responsible one, the smart one, the one who had everything figured out. But guess what, Sarah? You're just as bad as I am. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, please, tell me, how exactly am I just as bad as you? She stepped closer, a cruel smirk tugging at her lips. Because you didn't just want me gone, she said, tilting her head. You wanted to destroy me. You could have just kicked me out, but no, you had to humiliate me. You set me up. You tricked me into signing that stupid document. You wanted me to lose. I didn't deny it. Because she was right. I had given her a taste of her own medicine. I had let her believe she was in control, let her think she was winning, just to watch the moment she realized she had already lost. And I wasn't sorry. So what if I did? I asked, my voice flat. You had it coming. Her eyes flashed with something dangerous. You have no idea what you just started, she said, her voice a low hiss. I arched an eyebrow. Are you threatening me? She took a slow breath, schooling her features back into something almost calm, collected. No, she said simply. I'm just saying you don't want to push me, Sarah. I know things. And so does Mom. That caught my attention. Melanie smiled, sensing the shift. Oh, you didn't think I was the only one who's ever kept secrets, did you? I stared at her, waiting, my heartbeat picking up just slightly. She leaned in. You might want to ask her, she whispered, her lips curling in amusement, who really paid for your first apartment. A slow chill crawled up my spine. My first apartment, the one I had worked my ass off to afford, the one that had set me free from our family's dysfunction, the one I had always been so proud of. She was lying. She had to be. Right? I didn't flinch. Nice try, I said, keeping my voice steady. But I'm not playing this game with you anymore. Melanie just smirked. We'll see about that. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving me standing there, gripping the counter, my mind spinning. I shouldn't have let her get to me. But as much as I wanted to brush off her words, something inside me was already unraveling. Had my entire independence, the thing I had fought for, the thing I had used to justify cutting Melanie off so many times, been built on a lie? I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to get them. I picked up my phone and called Mom. Her voice came through the line, cautious, uncertain. Sarah? She said slowly. I took a deep breath. Did you pay for my first apartment? The silence that followed was deafening. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, the kind that makes your stomach sink before a single word is spoken. That was my answer right there. If my mother had nothing to hide, she would have scoffed, laughed, called me ridiculous for even asking. Instead, I could hear the way her breath hitched slightly, the pause before she spoke, a hesitation that only came when she was figuring out how to lie. Sarah, she finally said, her voice careful, slow. Why would you ask something like that? I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the counter, my nails pressing into the cool surface. Because Melanie just left here with a smirk on her face, telling me I should ask Mom who really paid for my first apartment. And since she's a pathological liar, I figured I'd go straight to the source. So, I'll ask again, and this time, I want the truth. Did you pay for it? Another pause. Then, finally, a sigh. Not exactly, she admitted. I clenched my jaw. What the hell does that mean? It means, she said, and I could practically hear her trying to soften the blow, that when you were getting ready to move out, Melanie came to me. She told me you were struggling to come up with the deposit, that you were embarrassed to ask for help, I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. So she what? Offered to help? Loan me the money out of the kindness of her heart? Mom hesitated. There it was again. That tiny, telltale pause before she gave me a carefully worded version of the truth. Not exactly, she said again. I squeezed my eyes shut. Mom, stop dancing around it. Where did the money come from? There was a long, deep breath on the other end of the line. She took it from your savings. My body went cold. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. My savings, I repeated numbly. Mom's voice was small now, as if she knew exactly how bad it sounded, but was hoping I wouldn't explode. She said she was just borrowing it and that she'd put it back. She told me you wouldn't even notice. I laughed then, a sharp, bitter sound that felt too big for my chest. She stole my money. She stole my own damn money and used it to make herself look like a hero. She was young, Sarah, Mom tried weakly. I cut in, my voice flat. Don't even try to defend her. You knew. You knew. And you didn't say a word. Mom exhaled, guilt thick in her silence. I thought she put it back, she admitted quietly. She didn't, I snapped. I struggled for months, trying to figure out why my finances weren't adding up. I thought I had made a mistake, that I had miscalculated. But no, it was her. And the worst part? I had thanked her for helping me. I had owed her in my mind. I had let her hold it over me for years, believing that in some twisted way, she had done something good for me when in reality, she had been the reason I had struggled in the first place. I had spent all this time thinking Melanie's worst betrayal was now. But this? This had happened years ago. And I had never even known. I have to go, I said, my voice sharp, cutting off whatever weak excuse Mom was about to offer. And don't bother calling me to defend her again. I'm done listening to it. I ended the call. And then I picked up my keys. Melanie was sitting outside a dingy coffee shop when I found her, her legs crossed, phone in hand, looking as unbothered as ever. You look pissed, she said lazily, barely glancing up. I dropped into the chair across from her, my hands flat on the table. You stole from me. She smirked, finally setting her phone down. So Mom finally cracked, huh? I stared at her, waiting for an ounce of guilt, an ounce of remorse. There was none. You let me struggle, I said, my voice steady but cold. You let me feel like I owed you, like I should be grateful, when the entire time, you were the reason I had been struggling at all. Melanie shrugged. You figured it out eventually. My nails dug into the table. You're a parasite, Melanie. You take and take, and you never stop. You move through people's lives like a wrecking ball, leaving nothing but disaster behind you. And you don't even care. She tilted her head, studying me like I was the one who confused her. Why would I care? She said simply. I survive. That's what I do. I get by however I have to. If people let me take advantage of them, that's their problem, not mine. I took a slow breath, my heart pounding. Not anymore, I said, my voice softer now, deadlier. Melanie laughed, shaking her head. Oh, come on, Sarah. What else could you possibly do to me at this point? I'm already locked out of your apartment. You got your petty revenge. What, you think you're gonna scare me with some dramatic speech? I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. No, I murmured. I just wanted to be here when you got the call. Melanie frowned. And then, right on cue, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her face suddenly guarded, then swiped to answer. Hello? I watched as her entire expression changed. Her lips parted slightly, her brows furrowed, and then her face drained of color. I smiled. Because the thing about people like Melanie, they always left a trail. And all it took was one phone call to the right person, someone she had screwed over before, someone who had been looking for her for a long time. You remember Danny, right? I asked casually, watching as panic flickered in her eyes. The guy you scammed out of thousands before skipping town? He remembers you. And guess what? Turns out, he never actually dropped the fraud charges. He's been looking for you for years. Melanie stood up so fast her chair tipped over. You should probably run, I said, enjoying every second of her unraveling. Because something tells me Danny won't be as patient as I was. She stared at me, breathing hard, realization crashing over her in full force. And then, just like that, she ran. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, feeling a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying finally lift. Melanie would never change. She would keep running, keep scheming, keep wrecking everything she touched. But this time, she wouldn't be able to crawl back to me. And as I sat there, sipping my coffee, watching her disappear into the city, I smiled to myself. Good luck finding a couch to crash on now.